Hey everyone, this is Mason Hutchison and welcome back to Herb Rally, your daily herbal podcast. We come out with new episodes about 5 days a week, so be sure to tune in often. Our goal for the show is to help you along your herbalist journey no matter what stage you're at. We have over 590 episodes. We're almost to our 600th episode, so feel free to peruse those episodes and you're bound to find something of interest. Today's episode is with, our third episode of the day is with Chanchal Cabrera. And this is another episode of our new series called the Herbalist Hour. So I haven't decided yet if I'm going to be releasing these on its own podcast feed, but for now it's going to be on the Herb Rally podcast feed as well as our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to watch these interviews and see our faces, you could go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/c/herbrally, or just search Herb Rally in the search bar. It'll pop right up. And we're almost to 3,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed yet, please help us get us there and click that subscribe button. But yeah, it was an absolute delight to have Chanchal on. She's just super impressive. She does so much. I really think you're going to enjoy this interview a lot. There's practical takeaways, there's laughter, there's some good stories. But then she also just wrote a new book called Holistic Cancer Care. If you're a practicing herbalist, this is definitely a book you're going to want to pick up. I will leave a link to that in the show notes, and I know there's some sort of early bird discount for the book as well. So you can also learn more about Chanchal at chanchalcabrera.com. Also, before we get into the show, I want to let you know about Herbal Content Cottage. And this is a company run by Hannah LaSorsa, and basically they help herbalists specifically with copywriting, blog posts, photography, SEO, videography. So really anything for your herbal business needs, Hannah and the Herbal Content Cottage helps out with it. Anytime me and Amanda see them post something on Instagram, it's always just absolutely gorgeous. Amanda's obsessed with their branding. And I've seen a lot of the work that they do as well with well-respected and popular brands in the herbal community. They just do a phenomenal job. So if you're an herbalist with an herbal business and you're needing help with any sort of like I said, copywriting, photography, etc., check out the Herbal Content Cottage, and you can find more about them at herbalcontentcottage.com. I will leave a link to all that information on the show notes. But yeah, Herbal Content Cottage, highly approved by Amanda, who's also a really great designer and everything. So yeah, check them out. Oh, I also wanted to mention they've worked with Herbal Academy, Cammy McBride, Herb Farm, Jessica's Apothecary, Make and Mary, and more. Check out their portfolio on their website. Actually, I also think I'm going to get Hannah on the show here soon, so stay tuned for an interview with Hannah from Herbal Content Cottage. Really looking forward to that conversation. And as usual, before we get into the show, I want to read yet another Apple Podcast written review, and this is with Owl Gamer 1261. And they say, and this one gave me intense goosebumps. I really appreciate this, Owl Gamer. Why we love Herb Rally. What we love the most about Herb Rally is you, the podcast, the very special guests, the wonderful schoolhouse, the ever-growing events page, the beautiful monographs, educational content, and awesome merchandise. All would be nothing without you. Dear Mason and Amanda, I want to thank you for everything you do. Your hard work will never go unnoticed or underappreciated, because what you bring to our herbal community is unforgettable. Your voice and efforts have brought healers, teachers, students, and all people of life together in a way that herbalism deserves and needs. Oh, man. Yeah, I love that review. I think I'm going to print that out or something and put it in my house somewhere because it's just so nice. And it's a good reminder. We all need these reminders that we're doing work that is appreciated. And so, yeah, I really can't thank you enough. And if you have a moment, dear listener, to leave us a review, please go to Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast player you use and leave us some words of encouragement. And it always brings a smile to our face. Amanda appreciates it as well. And yeah, thanks so much. Last but not least, before we get into the show, I want to let you know about the upcoming 3-part Oxymil series with Kyle Denton. And this is going to be on our Herb Rally Schoolhouse membership area. So we visited Kyle in Milwaukee, and he taught us all about basically anything you'd want to know about how to make oxymils. And this is a video class. It's going to come with PDFs as well. And if you want to check it out, it's coming soon to herbrally.com/schoolhouse. You could get your first 30 days for free with coupon code podcast at checkout. Then it's only $10 a month after that. And it's one of the best ways you could help support the Herb Rally podcast. So thanks so much. herbrally.com/schoolhouse. Use coupon code podcast at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, I really hope you enjoyed this last episode that I'm posting today. That's our first 3 episodes of the Herbalist Hour. Stay tuned for more interviews coming soon. I've got some lined up. As I mentioned, I'll be doing one with Hannah, most likely here soon with Herbal Content Cottage. And that's going to do it for me today. I hope you all are well, and I'll talk to you very soon. Take care. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. The content in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to cure, diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. This information has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. We are not doctors, nor do we play one on the internet. Please seek advice from a qualified healthcare professional. Okay, MC Calico, take it away.
Yeah. Smoking herbal blends. We need some Mullen and some Kush, my brethren. While listening to Herb Rally podcast again. Herbalism at its finest with Mason Hutchinson. Yeah.
Well, hi, everyone. This is Mason with Herb Rally. We're here for another episode of the Herbalist Hour, and today we're joined by herbalist Chanchal Cabrera. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her new book, Holistic Cancer Care. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right on. But first, I'd really like to get to know Chanchal a little bit more. So first of all, Chanchal, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to finally meet you in the flesh.
That's right. sort of, kind of. Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm a little curious. I'm always curious about how herbalists get their start. So if you could kind of tell us about how you were maybe as a kid getting into herbs or plants, or maybe it came later in life. And I'm also always curious about who herbalists' first mentors were and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I can see myself on the Zoom screen, I realize right behind me is my dad. So my dad actually got me started, really. The picture happens to be there. He was in the 1960s and 70s. He got the back to the land bug. And he went into organic farming. I mean, before it was called organic, it was called chemical-free or natural farming. And he was the first overseas subscriber to Mother Earth News. And he was a pioneer in Wales, where we were living, with natural lifestyles. And so my mom was harvesting things in the hedgerows and making salves, and they made lots of homemade wine from berries in the bushes. And yeah, that was kind of how it all started. And then my dad got sick and he went to consult with David Hoffman. And David was a new grad, young herbalist, and sorted my dad out, fixed my dad up quite dramatically, quite impressively. And it really hit home, I would say, for myself and my sister. She's also a herbalist in Scotland, a medical herbalist. Came through the same training as myself, and has made her living as a herbalist. Neither of us ever had a straight job.
Wow, very
So it was
cool.
all down to my dad and David Hoffman, and David was very gracious because I later heard that my dad took him aside and said that I was about 14 at the time, and my dad was consulting with David, and he told David that I had a big interest in plants, because I did. I was always in the garden. I was always pressing flowers and looking up Latin names and really interested in plants. But Dad thought maybe I was going to get interested in some of the wrong herbs at about that age, and so he asked David to foster my interest a little bit. And so I went and watched David pouring tinctures, and David came and walked on my family's farm and looked at plants with Dad to show him the things he could pick for himself, which he did for another 40 years. Picked his own herbs to make his teas, meadowsweet in particular. And so David Hoffman was my first person who kicked me off. And I was a teenager. I was 14, and I didn't know I'd be a herbalist at the time, but obviously a seed was planted, no pun intended.
Wow, that's quite the first herbal mentor. We just visited David Hoffman at the California school last April, and I'm just always blown away by him. So that's really neat. You got to experience that as a teenager. I suppose he was in England at the time.
He was in Wales.
Oh, he was in Wales.
He was a long-haired hippie in a sort of teepee in a commune in Wales. and just finished herb school and starting his practice. And my parents knew people in that community and were, they didn't live there in that commune, but there was a whole lot of back to the land movement in West Wales, Pembrokeshire at that time, 60s and 70s. I guess it was happening in the US as well, as when Mother Earth News started and other such publications and general interest, but it also happened in the UK, and it happened a lot in Pembrokeshire. There was a couple of leading gurus of self-sufficiency that lived there, and my parents were part of that movement.
What made you go from Wales to, you're in Vancouver now, right? Canada?
I'm in Vancouver Island.
Oh, Island, okay.
Yeah, which is, of course, very different than Vancouver. First of all, it's 3 hours from the city, but Vancouver Island is, really west coast now. I came here in 1988, so I've had more of my adult life here than in the UK, but I had gone through herb school, graduated, practiced in Glasgow, and found it very, I could say back then in the late 80s, it was a cultural desert. It was really, first of all, myself and my business partner were the only herbalists in the city. And I do mean that literally. And there were 3 others in Scotland at the time. Wow. So we had no herbal community support system in place at all. It was very lonely. So I landed in Vancouver and there was nobody here either. And it was kind of lonely, but you build your community eventually. So I found Vancouver very conducive to herbal medicine. And I quickly found I had an audience that I could grow with. But I did go to school in the UK.
Yeah, I know, or I don't really know that well, but I figure the herbalism in Scotland is a whole lot different. Like I recently heard that herbalists in Europe wear like white lab coats and stuff like that. It's a lot more heavily regulated.
I think it's very different in different countries. There's no one size fits all there. In the UK, which obviously is what I know, we absolutely wore white coats in clinic when we were in training. I think at this point, you might find it's less than half of people do, actually. We certainly would be clean and presentable and professional looking and, all of that. But I think the white coat thing has fallen away for a large part. I don't know that they're required to wear them in clinics anymore. I run student clinics here. We don't require white coats. Okay. But I have sent people home for not being appropriately attired for clinic. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So in the UK, there is a legal precedent going back to Henry VIII that allows people to practice herbal medicine. So they have a legal permission to practice, which we don't have in North America. So they do a lot more medical style of herbal medicine than necessarily is always seen here. There's more folk herbalism in North America and more self-sufficiency herbalism and small scale community herbalism. There's some of that happening in the UK, but there's an awful lot of more clinic style, even in hospitals and in medical centers. So, for example, there's a herbalist in London, Alex Laird, who runs a medical herbal clinic in a dermatology program in a hospital in London. And her clinic is a dermatology clinic. So, those things the UK is quite innovative in trying to bring herbal medicine in. The herbalists over there may not agree. They would like to be a lot more integrated probably, but relative to over here, it's quite different. And Canada is very much like the US, where you're not allowed to practice medicine without a license, but you can be a healthcare provider. You can do wellness assessments and all that stuff. Semantics.
Sure. So do you and your sister nerd out when you get together on herbs and everything?
We do. We get on great. We're really close. When we get on holidays together, we tend to go and find herbal museums, botanic gardens, things like that. We have traded over the years. I had shops in Vancouver for 11 years. I had 3 herbal medicine stores and a manufacturing facility. And she had something very similar in Scotland. And so we not only traded recipes and formulas and software, but we actually traded staff. So we were doing, I can say this openly because it's so long ago now, it doesn't matter, but we were doing like job swaps. So they would trade apartments, jobs and cars and cats, for 2 months, let's say, and have a summer working, but in a different city because we had matched kind of businesses. So yeah, we're pretty nerdy together.
That's pretty fun. Just because we're kind of an herbalism events website, do you ever host events with your sister out in Scotland or anything like that? Retreats?
I host all sorts of events. I'm going to be teaching in Scotland in March the 25th. I have a full day teaching on improving outcomes with surgery using herbs and nutrition. So that's being run through the National Institute of Medical Herbalists, but it's available to anybody, and they can book it through the National Institute of Medical Herbalists website. And then I run a lot of programs and workshops myself here as well. And just because you asked, I'll just take a moment to say that I have this summer, I've got a couple of really interesting programs that that I really hope are well attended, because they're very useful. One is in May, running with another person who's an osteopath and a medical herbalist. And she and I are going to co-teach physical examinations and clinical assessment. So we're going to do how to listen to lung sounds, how to interpret all the different pulse pressures, how to check reflexes, how to palpate the abdominal organs, all that stuff. So hands-on physical assessment is quite difficult to get that training.
Very cool. I'm not sure if you were aware, but Herbal, we've been listing events since 2015. So I believe I just signed up for your. I think I just signed up for your newsletter, so I'll start paying attention and listing everything.
Yeah, because that is a program. It's a week-long intensive, 6 days, and it's really difficult to get training and how to put your hands on people and feel for things that are clinically significant, because of diagnosing and legal issues and all those things that people are afraid of. But actually, for the UK trained herbalists, it's a requirement that they do that, which is one of those differences you were talking about with the sort of more medical clinical approach. Yes, they are required to do physical assessment and diagnosis, differential diagnosis, which is languaging we can't use in North America. But actually, several of our students for this program are coming from the UK schools. There's distance learning. There's US-based students who are in UK schools who need this training. So the other training I'm offering this summer in July, end of July, is with David Winston. And he's coming for another, like a 5-day herb camp. And we do case reviews. And so that's for practitioners and senior students, bringing in challenging cases, puzzling cases, things to discuss on round table style with other advanced practitioner students. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. Are you involved with the Vancouver Island herb gathering at all?
It's run on my property. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. That's actually, I'm going to ask you more about that later. Is it Innisfree Farm?
That's my property. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we're a registered botanic garden, so it's fantastic for running the herb gathering. And Yarrow Willard is my colleague running those gatherings and the online one that we do in November. Pre-podcast, we were talking how you're not really on social media and everything, but I will say Yarrow Willard, right? Yes.
He's got one of the best herbalism YouTube channels out there. He's
Herbal Jedi.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would I bother to do anything really when I can just piggyback along with Yarrow, because he's very brilliant at that. But we're a great team, and we have another person in our team, Colleen Emery, who's a herbalist aromatherapist, and so we're with 3 of us that set up a not-for-profit to run the conferences.
So cool. Yeah, that's one I have not made it to yet, but one of these days.
We're in the Kootenays in British Columbia this summer. So we alternate between the east side of BC and the west side of BC, alternate years for our in-person. And this year we'll be in the Kootenays. So about 2.5 hours north of Spokane.
Okay. I will definitely leave links to all that and like the show notes and everything, along with the other events as well. But kind of going back to like childhood days, do you have any stories about maybe one of the first plants you were enamored with and how that all happened?
I was always in touch with the natural world. We always lived in the country, grew up in the country, always had, like, since 3 years old, I had a little one of those big old white stone sinks that I had a little flower garden in, growing nasturtiums that I could put flowers on my dinner plate and things like that. But when I was about 8, I had an experience, and I think many listeners will relate to this. in their own way. But I had one of those moments. I'd left the house and gone up into the hay fields, actually. We weren't supposed to go out in the hay fields because you're not meant to walk in that long grass before they cut it, right? But I'd found my way in and I lay down and I was lying in the middle of about a 12-acre field, right in the center. And the grass was really high above my head. And there was a butterfly and there were some birds and clouds. And I had one of those, I don't know even how to describe it, one of those out of body moments when you feel at one with the universe. And now as an adult, I could say I've spent my whole adult life chasing that ephemeral moment of utter oneness and bliss. And it's led me through my for 40 years, I've had a meditation practice. All the things I do in my life have been colored by wanting to live in that incredible joined up with nature, feeling at one with nature feeling. And it was a spiritual feeling. And I could say that that's probably informed everything I've done in my life.
What does your meditation practice look like?
I've been a disciple of Osho Rajneesh since I was 18. So I never did go to the big ranch in Oregon.
I was going to ask. Yeah, that guy.
No, I liked the teacher and the teachings, but not necessarily all of the disciples and all of the things that went down in the name of. I did go to, of course, I was in India a lot. So I did go to the ashram in India, but I didn't participate in much of the organization because I was always very dubious about many aspects of it. But the teachings remain core for me.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say I've really delved into that world, but I know what you're speaking of.
Yeah. And I've sat with Gangaji. I go to the Unitarian Church. Okay. I do sweat lodge many times. We have a sweat lodge on our land led by a First Nations elder. So I'm pantheistic.
Yeah, I'm kind of similarly. I was raised in an atheist home. And I've always been kind of had that spiritual side too. So my whole like adult life has basically been spent like trying out different religions or spiritual practices and that kind of thing. So I could totally relate. So this question comes from our friend Bevan Claire. And she asks, you have tried on a lot of hats as an herbalist over the years in your various career roles. Can you share a little bit about what you've learned in the process? Or do you have any advice for aspiring herbalists as they navigate their options?
Gosh, you can always rely on Bevan for a deep and searching question.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. And it's true that I've worn a lot of hats as a herbalist. I'm one of the, it used to be a more rare breed. I think there's a few more of us now, but I've made my entire life and living as a herbalist. I went to herb school. That was it. I went to college. I went to herb college. And I did my undergrad. Well, it was 4 years. It wasn't a degree at the time. It is now in the UK. After 15 years of clinic, I went on and did my master's. But through all of that, yes, I've been a clinician. I've been a farmer. I've been a product developer. I've been a retailer and a wholesaler. I've been an educator. I ran the herbal department for 12 years at the naturopathic school. And I'm a horticulture therapist, so I do outdoor healing work in the garden. I design therapy gardens as a consultant, so I design other people's gardens. So I do many hats. My advice, honestly, I mean, I'm a double Gemini, so I'm like lots of fingers in lots of pies. I don't know that it's always served me that well. I think that you can often go a lot further, at least in building some financial security, if you knuckle down and do one thing and do it really well. I tend to spread myself a bit thin. I have a lot of fun. I have a great quality of life, a great community, but I have not really found the one thing that is the only thing I want to do in herbal medicine. I kind of want to do a bit of all of it. So I'm not sure if that's a helpful answer to Bevan's students, because it is something, what I would say perhaps is that as a clinician, I have found a specialty, which for me is holistic cancer care, holistic oncology. And I do think that having a specialty in clinic is really great, because you should be a generalist first. You should get a whole lot of stuff under your belt to, not to be afraid of whatever walks through the door. But when you found a particular niche of medicine that really gets your attention, whether it's dermatology or gynecology or cardiology or pediatrics or whatever, it's great to go really deep, because you can't be good at everything. Yeah. And so in medicine, being mediocre ain't good enough. I can be mediocre in my garden. If it doesn't work, I'll pull it out and plant something else. No big deal. But I can't do that in medicine. So when I'm practicing, I found being a specialist actually really helpful. It gave me a lot more confidence in what I'm doing and my belief in the medicine, to be able to go deeper with a condition or a set of conditions and the treatments thereof. You have more to offer. So I have a general practice. I see all sorts of things, but cancer care is 80+%. And it allows me to really dive deep in a way that most practitioners wouldn't do with cancer care.
Yeah, a few thoughts on that. You really did come through with an answer, so good job. Is it my understanding that you actually wrote a book before your new book coming out on cancer care as well?
No, my first book was written 20 years ago. It was on fibromyalgia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I've just got the rights back. That means it's gone past its 20-year mark, and I might get around to redoing it and putting it out again. It sells now as a download off my website. It's actually out of print. And there's still lots of useful bits in it, but I think it could do a good refresh and update now, 20 years later. So yes, for many years, fibromyalgia was my clinical specialty. And then I basically burned out of clinic after about 15 years. I felt like I was helping a lot of people, but I wasn't learning a ton anymore. Clinic had become a bit of a grind after 15 years. And I knew I could help people, asthma, eczema, menopause. Yes, I've got herbs, but what was it doing for me? It wasn't really stretching me in the way that was engaging anymore. So that's when I went back to graduate school and landed in the holistic oncology arena after 15 years of general practice.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Start broad and then try to find a niche. I'm sure a lot of the herbal anti-capitalist community don't really know this saying, but they say like the riches are in the niches. Have you ever heard that before?
I didn't know that either.
But yeah, I think that's really smart, and why not pursue some sort of niche that you find really fascinating and, or you have personal experience with, so you want to help the world in that way. So I will let Bevan Claire know. So yeah, that was a good question. Moving on to your farm. I was looking at your website, and it really does look like you do a lot with your farm. It looks like you also grow and sell herbs to local restaurants. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. I have 7 acres here. We've been here 18 years. My husband he was retired when we met. He's a good bit older than me, and he is retired from a career with Agriculture Canada as a soil scientist and a plant disease specialist. And so he had grown, as he said, he'd probably grown 1 million lettuces to give them diseases and give them treatments and do things to them, but never ate them. So he'd never eaten anything he'd grown in all his career in agriculture. So we got together almost 20 years ago, and I was bound and determined to move to the country and have some land and do more or less what I'm doing now. I'd sold my business in Vancouver, which had always been, all the years I had my business in Vancouver's herbal medicine shops and factory. I was dreaming of my piece of land in the country. So he agreed that we could do that. So we moved out here to 7 acres, and we started out, he kind of got the bug of growing food. He got really keen. And then we hit 2008, financial crisis, etc. He got quite scared, I think, about the food security. And he started a CSA. So we had the first CSA in our valley. And we had 20 households, and he did that for 7 years, growing food for 7 years for 20 households. And he had a 20-week season, which if you do CSA, you'll know that's a long season. So he really pushed himself. He really, really pushed himself. And of course, after about 7 years, he came and he said, you know what, I think I need to, he turned 70 and he said, I think I need to have my second retirement. So I'm going to stop doing the CSA. I'm like, okay, great. Now what? So I took it on basically at that point. I'd been gardening here already, but at that point, we still maintain a few, like we sell berries, raspberries and so on to a local restaurant. And we sell a lot of herb teas to some restaurants up in town. But what I did was I went back to school again, seemed to be the eternal student. And I took 2 years diploma in Kew Gardens in London, in the big botanic gardens there, which is kind of the center and the hub of education for botanic gardens in the world. And so our property is one of 5 in British Columbia that are registered at Kew as a botanic garden. And what that means, I'm in rather exalted company because it includes things like the big university gardens and, like some big institutions, and then there's me. But what it means is that we are open to the public and we're predicated on education and conservation.
Okay.
So we have a living seed bank. We grow out about almost 300 species of medicinal plants. And that's a living seed bank means that's a resource in the community. If people need plants, roots, stalks, seeds, cuttings, whatever, we've got it. And we have a large native garden, which is medicinal plants of the region. Mm-hmm. And we do lots of education around growing your own medicine, growing your own food security, but also medicine security. It's a really big buzzword for me because people don't realize where their drugs come from, how they're manufactured, how petrochemical intensive they are, packaging, more packaging, shipping, trucking, it's plastic, right? None of that's really sustainable. So we talk about sustainable food and localizing our food, but we also talk about sustainable medicine and localizing our medicine. So we run all kinds of programs here about that. We have a fiber and dye garden. And so we teach workshops, not me, but I have people here teaching workshops on making your own fabrics, spinning out nettle fibers, making natural dyes. We grew flax and made linen last year. So we have kids' school programs running here. We have concerts and herb walks and all sorts of things, and 7 acres of themed gardens. And we do garden tours. We have a cafe. Yeah, I'm a multi-fingered herbalist, obviously, and this is why I'm suggesting, back to Bevan's question. Yeah. It's great, and I touch a lot of people, and for me it works because my personal agenda isn't about making tons of money and having a holiday in the sun every year. It's not really about that. For me, it's about, I believe herbal medicine is one of the most powerful acts of activism that we can conduct by tapping into nature, by listening to nature, by living in tune with nature and respecting and supporting and healing nature. And that's the only way I can see that we're going to make it through, right? So I believe that if we don't get people to notice nature and appreciate nature, then they're not going to bother to take care of it or put their money in the charities that do the work or whatever. Like, we have to get people more connected. So there's an author, you may have heard of him, Richard Louv. He's written a couple of books, including his first big breakthrough book was Last Child in the Woods.
Yeah, I've heard that title, yep.
So he coined a term, and I find this to be very profound, and it sort of informs a lot of my work these days. That he coined this term, nature deprivation syndrome. And I truly believe, and in my fibromyalgia book 20 years ago, long before he wrote that, I didn't have that term, but I wrote about that, about how disconnect from nature is, in my belief, the fundamental pathology on the planet. It lets us eat crap food, stay up late at night with electric lights on our digital screens, all the things we do that are not natural, right? Disconnection, not living in harmony with the seasons, not eating seasonally, all of that stuff. Right? So 20 years ago, I was writing that. He coined the term nature deprivation syndrome. And so my work really is about healing that divide. And I'm able to do it in lots of ways, like putting crystallized lavender on the cake at my cafe. And people say, oh my gosh, lavender, that's so cool. What can you tell me about lavender? And I have a little pamphlet for them to read. right? So it's avenues, it's ways in. It's, they may think they're coming to an art class, but there's going to be a conversation about ecology and why we're using this plant that's growing prolifically where we don't want it, and we're going to clear out that invasive species and use it. We make baskets out of invasive brambles and stuff like that. So for me, it's all herbal medicine. It's just not clinical.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier you have a great lifestyle. It sounds amazing, and you probably feel extremely fulfilled doing all this work too.
Mm-hmm. And I have a great community of people because we have a lot of volunteers on our land. We run a full-on volunteer program. They come and work in the gardens. We serve a big lunch, community lunch, and there can be 15 people sitting down for lunch every week. It's a lot of fun, and we have a lot of community events. So it is nurturing, and for me, it feels like a healthy pension plan to have food, medicine, and community.
Yeah. What else do you need?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I would love to check out the farm someday. That's so cool. On a different note, Seven Song says, if you could only pick one eclectic physician to study with, who would it be? And if he demanded breakfast in bed as a recompense for studying with him, would that be a deal breaker? I don't know if that's an inside joke or not.
That is Seven Song. That's not an inside joke. I'm not sure where he's going with that. The question is it breakfast in bed with me or just breakfast in bed? But the answer is actually really simple, because there is an eclectic master that I go to. I'm often asked a sort of similar question, and so let me just expand it a tiny bit to say, when I'm studying a herb, when I'm looking at a herb, either a new herb I don't know, or one I want to refresh my memory on, because I go back, of course I go back again and again and look at stuff. I have a strategy where I go and look at one of the eclectics, which I'll say in a minute, and then I go and I look at why don't I just say it? I go and look at Kings. Kings is my go-to, and I have the books. I like page, to turn pages. I like handling books, so I buy books. So I have the eclectic set of Kings, and to me, that's the epitome of herbal medicine. That's like that they forgot more than I could ever know.
Okay.
And I don't read the chemistry, because obviously it's 100 years out of date. But John Uri Lloyd, Harvey Wicks Felter, I mean, that was a dynamic duo, and those books are phenomenal. For me, I find them incredibly useful about how to use the herbs. And you have to get through the old language, but once you've understood what they're saying, it's incredibly specific. Then I go on and I read really current, contemporary. I'll go and find online studies. I'll go and see if Cochrane's done some meta-analysis. I might go and look and see if Kerry Bones published something. I'll go and look at, monographs, official sort of WHO monographs, whatever. I'll go and read all the science. And then I'll go and read, usually, if I can find it, I'll go and read Matthew Wood.
So do you kind of delve into the more sciencey side or the more spiritual side? Do you like to blend both, or?
Well, what I'm saying there really is I try and look at all of it. I try and look at the eclectics first, because if they used a herb and they didn't have all the options we have, that herb probably worked.
Yeah.
Right. That's my belief, that the eclectics used herbs because they were effective.
Yeah.
So I start there. Then I look at the science. Then I look at the esoteric, energetic. I'll read not just Matthew, but other authors if I can find them. Matthew's is particularly good at the personality of the plants.
Sure.
In his New Age Herbal and his Old World, New World and Old World Herbal, they're so good for that. In my personal practice, I would have to say I do Western biomedical model. That's certainly what I was trained in. And I've layered and added in more energetic or esoteric practices along the way. We in Herb School in England in the 80s, early 80s, we were trained in the physiomedical humoral model. So I look at the hot, cold, wet, dry, sanguine, phlegmatic, melancholic, choleric, much like, for example, Jim McDonald teaches that model. So that's the model I trained in, and that's the model I would work in more myself. But I sort of dabble in, a few, I suppose. But in my practice, because so much of my practice is cancer care, I am right down in the trenches with the herb-drug interactions and what have you. So it comes down to constituents. And so, really, the kind of work I'm doing, I'll give you an example. I had a case recently of an infant with a genetic defect, very rare, that causes non-cancerous neurofibrillary tangles. It causes tangles of fibrillary tissue, fibrin, around nerves. And it's a genetic defect. And it's may or may not be fatal, but it's a catastrophic diagnosis for the whole family. It's absolutely catastrophic. High chance the infant will die. So they've offered her an experimental chemo because they think they know the pathway that this might work. So I go read up on this experimental chemo, see what that pathway is, and realize that there's several herbs and supplements that I know that target that pathway with other chemos that are working there. So now I can go back to the parents and say, I have no idea if what I'm offering you is going to be effective, but I do know that if you're going to do that drug because it's going to work on those pathways, I've got things that can work on those pathways as well. So whether you do the drug or not, we've got ways to support that process. And so that's the kind of intricacies that I'm working in. I'm working in isolates because the studies are in isolates in certain, it's really difficult to go from, you take a test tube or you take a mouse and you torment it in some ghastly way with some purified compound in a synthetic solvent, and then you say it's going to do this with a herb in a person. I mean, hello, it's a big jump.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's a preponderance of evidence from multiple studies with many different models that point to the same herb doing this thing, even if we don't love the way we got there. Sometimes there's so much pointing that way, you can't ignore the evidence. So it's a trade-off between not making too big of a jump versus not disparaging the research just because it's a model that's not very holistic. It's not holistic at all.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into the next question, which is basically just tell us more about your new book. Do you include that story in the book, and how is it kind of like segmented and laid out?
Well, that story isn't in the book because that patient is current in the clinic now, and it's not, the book was finished a little while ago, but in my practice, that's what I'm trying to establish is the most information that we can find about this cancer in this person. So essentially that means testing them in all sorts of ways, by which I don't mean tongue and pulse. I'm talking about blood work, I'm talking about scans, I'm talking about tissue cultures, I'm talking about genetics. And that's a really, it's difficult for herbalists because, first of all, we're not licensed, so we can't order those things. We have to find helpful docs who will get the slides released from the labs and sent to the other labs and all these sorts of things. So it's you have to get right in the face of the medical system and start asking for stuff. And it's quite interesting what you can get, but not everyone's willing to put themselves out there.
Sure.
So the book is laid out in two parts. It's got the first half, it's a pretty big book. The first part is more for the patient, like here's how cancer comes about, here's what it is, here's how it's sort of counted and measured a little bit, here's how to interpret some of the reports you're going to be seeing, here's some lifestyle and diet sort of things you can start to do for yourself. And then I've got a chapter on managing chemo and all the side effects, chemo and radiation, a chapter on managing surgery, a chapter on managing pain. And then I got a general materia medica, which is, I can't remember now, maybe it's 25 or 30 herbs. That's all the ones I use a lot in clinic for my cancer patients. And then I've got the practitioner section. And the practitioner section gets right down into all those pathways. And it says, if this thing shows in this test, these are some of the agents that have shown in the lab to influence that pathway. Make of that what you will. It's a bit of a stretch, but I can say if if they run this test and they see that you have, a certain, epidermal growth factor receptor elevation, then I know that if we're going to give you any herb at all, it's going to be green tea, because it's going to work on that receptor. Right. So I can narrow things down. I can target things a lot more by getting more and more detailed information about the cancer and its behaviors. And sometimes I'm working it backwards by what drugs they've offered. So I see what the drug is, go find out how that drug works, and then say, okay, what can I do to improve the outcome of the drug and mitigate some of the side effects? So that's often what I'm looking at, is trying to get the drugs to do better and have less side effects. And so that's what the second half of the book is about. And it goes through a second materia medica of all the cytotoxic herbs, which is the fun part for me, because that's all the herbs nobody else is writing about. Pacific yew and poke root and, the poisonous herbs, and giving doses for internal use of herbs that wouldn't normally get written about. So it's a bit of an edge to put that out in the public.
Pacific yew probably grows where you live, correct?
It does. And then I have case studies. I got 3 cases where I've worked through real patients from my clinic who are still all alive. Good. Yeah.
Is it generally recognized by your mainstream doctors that Pacific yew is effective for cancer treatment?
Well, I don't know how to answer that exactly, because the drug Taxol is from yew. So they certainly recognize Taxol, and Taxol itself is a diterpene found in the yew as is, but it's now a semi-synthetic drug because of the supply chain challenge. It was taking so much yew tree bark to make it, they couldn't sustain that. So it's semi-synthetic. It still starts with actual plant material, actually the needles quite often now. So certainly any oncologist would know that Taxol is a yew tree extract. Would they know that there are 26 other related diterpenes, some of which what the other diterpenes do is they inhibit the multi-drug resistance pump. So they stop your cancer cell booting out the Taxol. The Taxol's not good for it. Cancer cell's no fool. It's like, I don't want that. Out you go. And it can push that Taxol out against the concentration gradient, using energy, pushing it out of the cell. And that's called multi-drug resistance pumping. And it's pumping because it's using energy, and it's resisting the drug. And it's multi-drug because that mechanism can work against lots of different drugs. But in the case of Taxol, you can shut that process down by giving whole herb alongside the drug, and the other diterpenes disable the resistance pumping, so the Taxol stays in the target cell longer, does its job where it should, doesn't spill out and have toxic effects on adjacent tissues, and you need less dose because it's where it should be doing what it should be doing.
Wow, you you sound like an expert. This is a lot of years in the making, I suspect. Did you have a lot of help with the book, or was it just I
did have help with the book.
Yeah.
First of all, I will always give credit to Donnie. Donnie Yance was my teacher, is my teacher, brilliant man. I had an expert reader who came in behind me and sliced and diced and chastised me where I went way off base, and that was Eric Yarnell.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Eric was brutal. He was brutal. He wrote me at one point, a note saying, "This is crap, capital letters crap." And I was like, that's why I asked you to be my reader, because I tried to think that who would be the most critical person. I thought Jonathan Treasure or Eric. So
well,
Eric
I'm sure
was
that
my
the final
reader. I'm so grateful to Eric. He cleaned me up a lot. Obviously, I had an editor and then a copy editor and then proofreaders and all of that. But yes, Eric was my sounding board.
What a project. How long did it take to do the whole thing from beginning to end?
It took 2 years.
Okay.
It took 2 years.
Wow, that's pretty quick considering all the other stuff you do.
Well, I was very lucky, Mason. I got the contract right at the beginning of COVID in April 2020. And I told them I have a summer season on my farm and I won't be shutting down because I'm an outdoor event. I'm allowed to keep having people visit. So, so I told them I won't write for 6 months and then I'll start. And then it was full COVID. Yeah. Everything was just like in slow mode.
Yeah.
And I had this great project. So I just stayed home and wrote. And it was really good. And it took me, obviously things had to come back out of pandemic, but I had broken the back of it by then. I had that winter of 2020 into spring of 2021 where I was able to just get my head down. And actually I rented a house about 20 minutes from where I live so I could get away because I wasn't locked down and silented enough here in the pandemic. There were still activities around and folks here. And so I took myself away for 3 months and was alone. And then I had a couple more spells away when I was writing. And yeah, it took me 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, I could imagine renting a place to get the project completed would be the best avenue. I keep thinking, I'm like, I have a couple big projects coming up and I'm like, I should probably just go away somewhere for a little bit. Yeah, that's probably wise.
Yeah.
So a little bit more about the book. What is your goal for the book? Who are you hoping buys it? The people actually with the cancer, or what are you hoping to accomplish with it?
I'm hoping to reach people with cancer and their caregivers, I guess, people who are around the world of cancer and the work of cancer. I guess what I'm really hoping is to give empowerment to people, to give encouragement to people that not only are there things they can do for themselves or that they can arrange to have done, whatever, but that it's actually effective, that it actually works. And that I think is the really big part of it, because myself, and I could say probably many other herbalists, I felt really helpless and probably almost hopeless for a long time. 15 years of clinical practice, I had a handful of cancer patients. I wouldn't basically book them. I would refer them to a naturopath or something. I don't know what I'm doing out there. I didn't know what I was doing out there. And, it wasn't until I delved deep that I began to see how much there was to offer. And doing my master's research at Donny's clinic, it was 20 years ago, and he hired me to do research. I was a lucky one. I did my master's research actually on a contract, so I was super lucky. He hired me to do research into long-term survivors of breast cancer in his practice. So I was doing interviews with people who had had cancer for 10 years and were still there, and they were still having a good quality of life. Even some of them had cancer in their bodies. And in fact, in my book, one of the patients still has his cancer, but he's now about 3 years past what they said was done. Like that's it. Don't, call in the palliative care people. And so I just want to empower people to feel like they've got some choices, some capacity to direct the treatment in more thoughtful ways. Most people who get cancer care today get one size fits all, no smarts. Targeted cancer care is just coming in now with the new immunotherapy drugs, where you may be offered some genetic screening to see if you fit certain drugs. But there's, I don't know, well over 100 of these new drugs right now, and nobody's getting tested for all of them. And so there's big gaps. And there's just a lot of going out blind with treatments and hope and faith. And what I'm often doing with my patients is saying, there's nothing wrong with chemo. And there's nothing wrong with that chemo. But is that the right chemo for you? That's the question. It's not about the chemo being right or wrong. Chemo saves lives, but you got to get the right one. And then you got to figure out how to give it the best way. So, for example, in Germany, they'll sometimes put a little tube right into your tumor and drip your chemo right in the middle of it and do like a local delivery. Or you can fast before chemo, and cancer gets really hungry really fast. It needs sugar. So you fast before chemo and then take your chemo with a tiny bit of something sweet. And the cancer's like, oh, gimme. takes it all up, and you get much quicker, better delivery of the chemo into the cancer cell. Sometimes you give insulin with that. It's called IPT, insulin potentiated therapies. And so there's all these creative ways of giving chemo. Even the time of day, your liver is most active between 2 and 4 a.m. So if you give your chemo at 1 a.m., it's going to go to the liver quicker than if you give it at noon. Right? So if you're targeting the liver, that's called chronotherapy, the timing of the chemo. So there's all these different ways that you can make the treatments, conventional treatments, work better for you. And the herbs fit in there, of course.
Yeah, it sounds like your book covers all of this.
Covers tons of stuff. And the book actually came out of one of the reasons why I did only take 2 years. I have a 6-day intensive that I've been teaching for several years on all of this. So I had lots and lots of notes and stuff kind of organized already in a sense. So I took a lot of the work I'd been doing and put it into the book and took it on much, much further in the book. But I will be teaching that series again in the fall for practitioners, 5 or 6 days deep dive.
I would also be curious sometime, maybe on a round 2 or something, like how you are able to focus and organize all of your like information. Like it just sounds like you're kind of streamlined at this point.
Oh, I wish. Oh, you're my friend. Yeah.
It's just hard work.
I don't always think that I work the smartest. I do work really hard, and I do have an absolutely awesome assistant in my clinic who herself is a medical herbalist and acupuncturist. And so she runs the back end of a lot of things for me.
Amazing. Any particular place you want people to pre-order or anything like that?
Well, the book is available on my website right now, and it has a pre-publication special price. Okay. So I don't have the books yet. There are advanced copies out there, I hear, but I haven't got one in my hand. Okay. So, the best way is to go on my website. It is on Amazon as well. So either way is fine. And then, of course, if people are interested in it, I don't know when this podcast is going to go live, but if people are interested in any of the workshops or programs and so on, I also run internships. I'm looking for people to come and garden with me this summer and live on site and do work trade. We're having a 10-year anniversary of our botanic garden, and so we're doing a big garden renewal this year with lots of new beds going in and stuff. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So that's chanchalcabrera.com, as well as you have innisfreefarm.ca, I think. Yeah,
exactly.
Cool. Yeah, we'll link to all that. You got time for a couple more questions?
I do.
All right, cool. This one's for fun, and this one comes from Seven Song. And he says, can you sing or recite the Welsh national anthem?
Oh, Seven Song. I can give you the first couple of lines. Mae hyn wlad fy nghadaeth yn annwyl I fi, gwlad beth a chantorion ein wogion o'n fri. And if there's somebody listening who speaks Welsh, they're probably cringing right now because it's been a long time. I did. Used to know lots and lots of, I did all my primary school in the Welsh language.
Okay.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, you did well.
I did pretty good, eh?
And last but not least, we've been asking, what is your favorite part of being an herbalist, and what's your big why that keeps you learning and growing?
Oh, that's a big question. My favorite part of being a herbalist. I suppose 2 things really. One is the great people I meet, just the community is really wonderful. And the plants. The best part of being a herbalist is I get to work with plants, and even teaching, I get to show pictures of plants. And so for me, that's, the magic is in the medicine itself. And what was the second part? What keeps me learning? Yeah.
What's your big why that keeps you learning and growing?
Oh my gosh. I don't even know how to answer it, because I think some people are just born curious, and some are happy to just take it as it comes. And I'm just, what? I'll answer you with an analogy. I got kittens at Christmas. And our old girl had to go, and we waited a few weeks, and then we gave ourselves, my husband and I, a kitten each for Christmas. And they're siblings, they're from the same litter. and they've had exactly the same upbringing. And one of them is shy and hides away and waits things out and doesn't put herself forward. And the other is just out there, like in trouble, having adventures, and then kind of going back to report to her sister. And I think that, that's a good analogy of how people are. And some of us are just curious and some of us are not. And so for me, the learning is just, gosh, how do people not learn every day? To me, it's a complete mystery. I'm forever reading and studying, and every patient is an opportunity, because even if I think I've seen that drug, seen that condition, whatever, I'm almost always going to go and look into it again and see if there's something new or something different or a new angle on it. So I am researching and studying constantly for my own interest, but also specifically for my patients.
Yeah, curiosity. We were talking again before the call. You're never bored in the herbal field, so
not at all. And I also offer a sort of mentoring program, like a one-on-one for people who want to review cases. I do other sort of business development mentoring and stuff too. But the one-on-one, they come to me because they're struggling with a case, and those are difficult cases with tricky things happening. And so there's always learning, always researching. Mm-hmm.
I did see on Chanchalcabrera.com there was a kitty on the banner image. Is that the one that passed away?
Yes.
I've got little Zilla right here.
Oh, that's a beauty.
Yeah, she's pretty.
She's lovely. Yeah. My spirit animals.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Any final words or
Well, we went all over the place there. That was a round robin of herbalism, I think. And you drew out a few things I wasn't expecting to talk about, like having spiritual experiences at 8 years old. But I guess I would just close by saying to anyone who is listening and wonders, yes, absolutely, you can make a living as a herbalist. There are many models to follow. No one of us has it all figured out. But there are actually quite a few of us who actually do okay in our herb work, and it's rewarding because you're helping people. So at the end of the day, that's can't imagine doing anything else.
Amen. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.